Councilmember Endres?
Mr. Willems, can you pull up that presentation that I gave to you, please? We've had this discussion numerous times, and can you give one to Joni, please? And so I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to step back and look at all the taxes. How many are there? You get one to Warren?
Oh, no.
Okay. So I thought providing maybe some metrics and really honing in on the data may make sense. As a reference point, the first 8 slides of this are what we're going to talk about, but all the detailed calculations are behind in the appendix. So slide 2, really, as we talk about them, is just really an overview of why a jurisdiction charges taxes. So you've got licenses for the ability to be able to conduct business, you've got fees to reimburse fee for service, and then you have taxes, money paid to support the infrastructure, or as people say, generate revenue. Can you go to the next slide? The interesting thing is when you look at the budget for 2017 and you break down the components, so for those that really can't see that, the $55.9 million is what was in the 2017 budget for all the revenues that are all the taxes that are collected in the city of Johns Creek. And I thought it was important to look at it and say, well, which ones are charged directly to the consumer and which ones are passed through to the consumer? And ultimately the chart, the blue is paid by the consumer and the green is passed through. So in essence, we're all paying those taxes. So we say we're charging businesses, but we're paying them.
Councilmember
And it's
Endres,
just for reference.
can I just get a point of clarity? When you say the consumer, you're not always referring to a citizen of Johns Creek, correct?
No, it's whoever the consumer is that buys the product, right? Correct. So slide 4, please. But here's where it gets interesting. Mr. Kerouac sent me all the data for all the taxes, licenses, and fees that are collected from the businesses. And I broke it out between home-based and what I call brick and mortar, which is your buildings. And UBL stands for Unique Business License. So each one of those home businesses or businesses had to go to the city to get a license number, and it's unique. And when you actually look at it, the home-based businesses, the average, and I broke it out between profit and not-for-profit because not-for-profits don't pay taxes. So for profits, the average number of employees for home-based is 1, and they pay in total $286,000. And when you actually broke it down and looked at using $7.25, the Georgia minimum wage, as a qualifier to hours worked per FTE, full-time equivalent, to pay the taxes, licenses, and fees, it's 24 hours for home-based business per employee, 16 for brick and mortar. And then you look at the cost per full-time employee at the $7.25 is $173 per employee for home-based and $117 for brick and mortar. So if you could go to the next page, please, next slide. And what's interesting about the home-based businesses is that you happen to be working at home, you're doing the right thing, you're not out, you've started your own business, you're working in your house, you're not out creating traffic, you're not out in the middle of chaos, you're doing all your business for the most part online, your customers aren't really coming to your place of business, and you're at your house, which means you are also paying property taxes. So as a group of 1,200 businesses that pay $286,000 in taxes, licenses, and fees, they're paying approximately $820,000 in property taxes for their property. And the question is for one employee is what additional services are being provided to those homes that would generate the need to reimburse the city for that much more. And the interesting thing is if you or I worked for another business and we worked from home, which is the same scenario, we would not be paying that tax. They're only paying the tax because they actually got a license number and filed with the city. And so I think that's important because then when you look at the average household calculation for a person who's running a small business out of their house, the statistics out there, the average household income in Johns Creek is about $108,000. You back off the standard taxes that we have to pay, and these are all documented in the appendix. So you've got federal, FICA, Medicare, are 7.65%. State income, your total property taxes, you're down to 68%. But then as a home-based business, most of them are either sole proprietorships, partnerships, or S corps, which means they have to cover the FICA Medicare match as well as unemployment, and that's not talking about all the other taxes that they have to pay for their utilities and for everything else. So when it's all said and done, that individual homeowner, potentially using the averages, is left with 62% of their income. And you put on that the taxes, licenses, and fees, not only for Johns Creek, but Fulton County and the state, because there are filings all the way up. And that really is leaving you to look at how much profit is really left. And when you look at a gross receipts tax that goes up as you are doing more in revenue, you're being penalized for doing good work. So you're sitting at home, working from home, not in traffic. You're generating the engine of this country, which is what we're based on, and you're being charged a lot more just to be working out of your home. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Now the next one really is breaking down the brick and mortar business, and this is the one that I found very interesting. So when you look at everything in total, for all the businesses in Johns Creek, the average number of employees are 10. So I used different breakpoints to look at that data. So I broke it at 10, 50, 100, and 500. What is interesting is as you go up the line, those that have the larger amount of employees per employee are paying less. And you're going to say, well, that makes sense. It's economies of scale. But in reality, those larger businesses with the 500 employees should actually be reimbursing the city more for the impact that they're having on the infrastructure, right? Because that's why we're paying taxes, is to pay for the infrastructure impact. Yet, that's not the case. And when you look at 500 employees, it's 12 unique business licenses, but it's really 5 companies. And so where you've got average number of full-time employees per unique business license greater than 500 is 370, you're still looking at a total average of 10 employees overall for every company in a brick and mortar business. So, and you can look at the statistics on there about hours worked and the minimum wage, and it's just interesting how the smaller businesses are so much more significantly penalized per se in taxes instead of it being an equal representation as we would want it to be. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is the one that I really broke down and looked at those companies that were in the 500 and really looked at how much in taxes. So those five companies that have greater than 500 employees are paying $160,000 in business licenses and fees. Now you go back to the home-based businesses and they're paying $280,000. So you also break that down per company, and some of them have different structures, but you can look at the variation in hours worked per full-time equivalent and the minimum wage, and it's drastic between the companies. And then you also look at the property taxes that were paid by those same folks. And again, you look at the companies that have more than 500 employees, and the Johns Creek property taxes are $250,000, yet those home-based businesses are paying over $800,000. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So for me, recommendations, and this may be hard to see for y'all, I'm realizing how tiny that is. I personally think that home-based businesses shouldn't be charged anything. They're doing all the right things. They're home, staying off the streets. They're generating revenue. They're utilizing the services in their home. Most of them don't have people coming to their house. I was interviewing businesses for the last 3 months to ask them specifically what services are they receiving, how is this working, thoughts on taxes, and every single one of them said, I never hear from the city unless I have to pay my taxes. And so, and again, 1 employee is all the average they have. Then I broke out medical companies because through my interviews, it was all word of mouth and people referring me, so it wasn't a targeted group. I found in medical companies, technically a medical company files with the city if they get charged a $400 fee for a physician. But there are medical companies or pharmacies out there that may have a retail footprint, and because they have a small retail footprint, they're now paying tax on their revenues. So take a pharmacy, for instance, a local pharmacy. They have to pay the $400 to get their pharmacist licensed, but they're paying gross revenue tax on the drugs that they're selling to you and me that are prescription-based. And that gives me concern partially because when you see the regulations that are placed on the medical industry, industry as it is. They're pretty significant. And so I don't have a recommendation in there. I left it because they're at $400. I personally think is a recommendation. Those that are paying the $400 fee should not have to pay retail taxes on the retail business because it's redundant. You shouldn't be paying tax at a minimum on at least the pharmaceutical side or on any of the medical pieces that they're doing as a part of the medical services they're providing. And then if you look in the brick and mortar, I realize this isn't going to go over, but it's more for discussion's sake. Like I said, you should be able to look at the number of hours worked and the fee paid, and they should be the same no matter how many employees you have if you're looking at an equitable structure. So I took the average for the over 500 and backed into those numbers for the other levels just as a reference point. And so when you actually do that using the reference from what was calculated for greater than 500 for various reasons, you're looking at actual tax of about $613,000, which is $1 million different than where we are today. But I think that looking at businesses and recognizing the fact that if you're going to charge them more based on their success, that you're directly impacting their ability to be profitable, as well as what services did we do to earn that from their success. And I think that's part of the discussion that gets missed from when we sit here and talk, just looking at how the data plays out. Again, I feel very strongly about home-based businesses. We're doing them a disservice, for sure. But the brick and mortar companies, I think we have more to look at. I realize there may be only certain options that we can use as a taxing base, but I think flat fee is better, but you'd have to scale it because there are people who are paying $100 and some paying $500. But you need to align so that equally the companies are paying and recognize it's taking the same amount of work an employee of a company that has one employee as well as in a company that has 500, because at the end of the day, if the goal is to receive reimbursement from companies that are having a major impact on the infrastructure, then they should cover that part. And as you dig in the details, you'll see some of those companies are, some are for various reasons, but I think that's critical to the discussion, as well as with the medical companies. I did receive some feedback that our fee is higher than our local, and if we're going into a wellness initiative and we're looking to seek people coming and we want them to come to Johns Creek, we want to be as competitive on that as possible. So I look forward to your questions. I really just wanted to express myself more using numbers because that's who I am, and look forward to further discussions on this.
Council, any questions of Councilmember Endres' information?
I don't have a question. I mean, I'd like to talk about this some more. Frankly, had I known you were doing this, I probably would not have done this tonight, Stephanie, to be quite honest with you, because you could have sent this to us. And now I'm going to be up here and try to make comments. I can't comment on this. I don't know if I agree with everything in here. I have to research it. So, I mean, this is something that I feel like I'm ambushed with this, kind of, to be quite honest with you. We've been talking about this for a long time. And I'll look it over and I'll have a discussion next time, but I can't comment on this. I mean, there might be great ideas in here. I don't necessarily agree with some of them, I don't think, but I have to go back and look through it, so I can't comment on this tonight. So I guess we have to take this to another work session. You know, one thing I got from Justin's presentation is you were making this revenue neutral. And I guess my concern with making it revenue neutral, does that make it right taxed? And, you know, I'm not so sure I need to be revenue neutral. I just want to make sure that we're fair compared to our other cities and why someone... I don't want it to be more burdensome for someone to come into Johns Creek, and I think by making it revenue neutral, that's where I, you know, maybe have a difference of how we went about it. I know you had to go with a certain way. I guess I need to look at this. I guess I need to look at this stuff and see what Stephanie came up with to see, because there's been a lot of work in here. I just, you know, I can't comment on it tonight.
So, Councilman Saprowski, I'm in complete agreement with you. We delayed a topic on hotel motel taxes at the work session because Councilmember Endres was not prepared, and then at the same time you give us multiple pages of data we've never seen before, and I'm not sure that's an appropriate way to treat your colleagues here. It's as I said before, it's an important topic, but there's a lot of material to study and go through here. I appreciate your hard work in doing this, but it's difficult to have a discussion, a series of questions when, you know, we haven't had a chance to study this prior to the meeting.
I'd like to make a different comment. So first of all, I do think it's a very important topic. I don't know that I agree with all the assumptions that you've put into this, but in fairness, I need a little more time to absorb. And I do want to thank you, though, because it's clear you've put a lot of work into this. But I will agree with my colleagues in saying that one of the things that I have noted over the 10 years that I've been sitting behind the dais is when we've had the most fruitful conversations as a body, it has come without surprise. And when there have been times that we have looked back either because we acted on something in the moment, or that I found that there was either myself or others were very frustrated, it was when information was sprung on us. I have to assume that, one, this did need some element of presentation to bring clarity, but I think that we could have certainly come more prepared to ask questions and have a more informed conversation on what is clearly some important information had it been presented early. And I would just ask as a favor in the future of all of my colleagues that if we're going to have a discussion about something and you feel like there's something that's really pertinent to that conversation, please distribute it in advance. I think it's more difficult to have a conversation. I mean, at this point, for me, I don't know that it's worth continuing on for me personally until I've had time to now absorb this and then contrast it against the other information that was presented by staff. Although I would ask, does anyone else have anything that they were going to add to the discussion in terms of a presentation? Because if so, then it would be good to get all that out before we move on, if we're going to move on.
Well, I think Councilmember Endres does bring up a good point about home-based businesses. So our number one quality of life issue here in Johns Creek is traffic. And if these numbers are correct, and we're charging on a per employee basis, home-based businesses, more taxes than these large companies, well, we're actually disincentivizing people to work from home. And I would think that that's one of the businesses, since our number one quality of life issue is traffic, that's something we should encourage.
Councilmember, if I may, can I just, this is where I think the assumption is very important. So, having talked to a number of home-based businesses, having understood some of the reasons why they chose to license themselves out of their home as opposed to opening an office or taking office space, that doesn't necessarily mean they were working from home. And I think that the number one assumption that I've heard throughout this presentation, and you're carrying it forward in your comments, is that, and I'm not suggesting that some do not work at home, it may even be the majority, but some of the larger, in terms of the revenue that they're generating, home-based businesses, it's convenience that the fact that they're calling themselves located in their home, they are not working in their home. They might be sales businesses, they might be a number of other things where they're just as much out on the road as anybody else. So I think that the assumption that they are doing the right thing was the quote that I heard. First of all, I don't think that it's doing the wrong thing to go out and promote your business, regardless of whether that's sitting in your desk at home or sitting in your kitchen or getting out in the street and meeting with whoever it is that you do business with. But I think it is a false assumption to assume that all home-based businesses mean that people are sitting at home.
But they have the ability to impact traffic by what hours they commute or do not commute.
Why? What stops them from not needing to get out at the same times as anybody else?
Because if they're home-based businesses, they can set their hours how they specify. They may go out.
So can any employer or employee, in theory, unless they're mandated to be at the office at a certain time. I mean, I just, again, I think you're making almost a definitive statement. And while I agree that it would be true for many of them, it is just not a categorically true statement.
Well, maybe this could be a nice call out to home-based businesses. If you're a home-based business and you would like to be part of this discussion, please email us and let us know.
They're not going to do that. They're not declaring
Many of them
because
are
of our
afraid
tax
to come
system.
forward, actually.
Right.
Many
But
of
they
them
don't
are afraid
want
to come
to.
forward because they feel like they'll be penalized if they do.
I think it's fair.
I
Like
received that feedback.
Alpharetta has a $99, so I said $100, something like that. That way, people can. That's not burdensome on anybody.
So, please don't interpret my comments as suggesting there's not room for improvement.
But there are home-based businesses that are not neighbor-friendly,
I'm just trying to
too.
address potentially false assumptions.
Right, but there's also home-based businesses that are not neighbor-friendly, and
Absolutely, and I've heard that too over the years.
we have heard that. Yeah.
And I think also looking at, instead of looking at the group for the outliers, start treating the outliers as outliers. So if there are people who need extra services, who have issues, we need to find a way to address that so that we're not looking at the... We've gotten as a society to the point where if one person's bad, we penalize everybody. We need to not do that. These businesses are doing the right thing across the board. And if there are ones that aren't following the rules, we need to be more proactive and address that versus penalizing everybody else.
I actually agree with that completely. I think that oftentimes you spoil the bushel for one bad apple, and I don't think we should do that. Look, this is clearly a topic that needs a lot of thought. And again, I commend you and appreciate the fact that you brought forward clearly a lot of thought. And I offered that with the, I hope, taken in the proper sense, the fact that I would ask for the information in advance in the future so that we could have had a more thoughtful conversation about this particular information. That said, clearly I think we need to schedule this for further discussion unless the council wishes to continue the discussion at this time.
We talked about that continuing on to the next meeting, and we wanted to make sure that Mr. Kerouac was part of that conversation.
He will not, unfortunately, be, and I hate this time in the meeting to take this on. I'll just simply say he will not be, and we're going to properly address that in a few moments. But this will be the last participation that Mr. Kerouac has on this in a formal meeting format.
Then I am glad, because you originally thought you were going to be able to be there. So I am glad that that we did put it here. And if people were put off by the information, I'm glad, because it happened the way it was supposed to.
If I could add to Mr. Kerouac's credit, when I asked him if he's going to be here, he said, well, I'll be in Hilton Head at that time, but I'll drive back for the meeting. So I think that shows a lot of, I told him there's no way in hell he's going to be allowed to drive in from Hilton Head for that, as far as I'm concerned, but certainly do appreciate that commitment.
I want to table that part of the conversation if we can, because I would like to separate it from this. But does the council have any further discussion they want to take up on this at this time?
No.
Well, I mean, I think unless we're going to give staff direction, it's just, I don't know if we need to do revenue neutral versus, but we can discuss that later, I guess. Yeah.
I'll get this rescheduled onto a work session agenda. Further discussion on this?
First item?
Yes.
Great.
Next item, please.